My cousin tried to kill me with a crowbar, and now my entire family is gaslighting me into thinking I imagined it. The mask slipped when I kicked him in the knee. For a split second, time just stopped. The air was thick with the dust of 100 forgotten years, all those tiny particles dancing in the single beam of my flashlight, and in the middle of it all was his face. My cousin's face, Daniel, he was holding a crowbar. The same rusty one we'd used as kids to pry open a stuck shed door in this very house. He just swung it at my head, and the only reason I'm typing this is because I tripped backwards over a stack of old newspapers from 1987. The metal bar whistled past my ear and slammed into the wall behind me, sending a shower of plaster and ancient wallpaper down on my face. I was just staring at him, you know. My brain couldn't connect the dots. This was Danny, the guy I'd built treehouses with, the guy who held my head back once after I had too much cheap vodka at a family Christmas party. And he was standing over me, breathing hard, his eyes, God, his eyes were completely flat, like a shark's. There was no recognition, no oh my God, what am I doing? He just raised the crowbar again. I scrambled back, crab-walking through piles of my grandmother's junk. Danny, what the hell? My voice sounded pathetic, thin. He took a step forward, adjusting his grip on the crowbar. And then he spoke. His voice wasn't angry, it wasn't panicked. It was calm, colder than the grave this house was starting to feel like. Don't blame me, he said. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance. That's what broke the spell, the sheer insanity of those words. I didn't wait to ask what he meant. I just turned and ran. I crashed through the back door, ignoring the splintering wood that tore at my arm, and didn't stop running until the broken porch of that rotting house was just a silhouette against the moon. The whole time, my mind wasn't on the pain in my arm or the pounding in my skull. It was on one thing, telling everyone, telling his parents, my parents, exposing him for the monster he was. I was so naive, I drove straight to my parents' house, my hands shaking so badly on the steering wheel that I was surprised I didn't crash. I didn't even bother with the doorbell, just burst in, bleeding from the scrape on my arm, face pale and smudged with plaster dust. They were in the living room watching some game show. The canned laughter from the TV felt like a personal insult. Danny tried to kill me, I gasped out, at the old house. He had a crowbar. The story tumbled out of me in a messy, frantic flood. The mask, the swing, the words he said. My mom's face went white with horror. My dad got on the phone immediately. But he wasn't calling the police. He was calling my Aunt Carol and Uncle Rick, Daniel's parents, a family matter, you see, to be handled internally. By the time they arrived, I was on my third glass of water, my shaking hands making the ice cubes clink against the glass like a frantic little bell. 20 minutes later, Daniel walked in. He didn't look like a monster. He had a clean bandage on his own forearm and a look of deep, soulful concern on his face. He looked like the victim, and then he told his story. He spoke calmly, his voice steady. He said he'd gotten to the house a few minutes before me, heard noises from inside, and thought it was a squatter or a burglar. He grabbed the old crowbar for protection. He said when I came in, he didn't recognize me in the dark, mistook me for the intruder, and they'd had a terrible, confusing struggle. He claimed the mask was just a dusty old ski mask he'd found and put on to protect from the dust, and it must have fallen off. He was so sorry if he'd hurt me in the confusion. He said I must have hit my head when I fell, that the shock of it all had clearly disoriented me. I just stared at him, my mouth hanging open. It was a masterpiece. A perfect, plausible lie that painted him as a hero and me as a hysterical, confused victim. And they bought it, every last word. I watched the doubt spread across their faces like a stain. My dad's firm jaw softened. My mom's hand, which had been on my shoulder, slowly withdrew. My Aunt Carol, Daniel's mother, was the first to speak. "Oh, honey," she said to me, her voice dripping with that infuriating, condescending sympathy. "You gave us such a scare. You know your cousin would never, ever hurt you." He said it's a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I almost screamed it. What kind of hero says that? Daniel just shook his head sadly. I said, "Thank God you're safe. I was so scared for a chance. You must have misheard in the panic, buddy. It's okay." "Buddy." He called me buddy. My uncle put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Son, Danny just got that big promotion at the law firm. His life is going great. Why would he do something like this?" "It doesn't make any sense." That was the moment the ground gave way. It wasn't about the facts anymore. It was about what was easier for them to believe. That their golden boy son and nephew had tried to bash my brains in, or that I, the slightly less successful, quieter cousin, had just gotten scared and confused. They built a new reality in that living room right in front of me, a reality where I was the unreliable one. The one who was maybe a little jealous, a little unstable. I was no longer the victim of an attack. I was the source of a problem, an embarrassment. And as I looked at the four of them, their faces a mixture of pity and annoyance, and then at Daniel, who was now accepting a cup of tea from my mother, I felt a coldness I'd never known. I was completely, utterly alone. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glint of the flashlight on the crowbar. Every time the house creaked, I jumped, thinking he'd come back to finish the job. After 2 days of pacing my apartment like a caged animal, listening to my parents leave concerned but not really believing voicemails, I did the only thing I could think of. I opened my laptop and poured it all out to a bunch of strangers on the internet. Edit 1. Wow, I didn't expect this to get so much attention. My hands are shaking just typing this. Thank you, all of you. It means everything to know I'm not totally losing my mind. A lot of you are asking the same questions, so I'll try to answer. Why didn't I call the police? I should have, God, I know I should have. But my first instinct was to go to my parents, and by the time Daniel showed up with his story, it was too late. He made me sound unhinged. If I'd called the cops after my own family sided with him, they would have seen me as a hysterical guy making false accusations against the town's promising young paralegal. It would have been his word against the confused, traumatized cousins. And to the people asking if we had some big fight or rivalry, no, that's what makes this so insane. We were fine. We weren't as close as when we were kids, but there was no bad blood. At least I didn't think there was. Someone asked if he'd been acting weird lately. I was about to type no, but then I stopped. Because yes, he had. It's just a small thing. I don't know if it means anything. About a week ago, he called me out of the blue. He was asking about Grandpa Robert, who passed away years ago. He kept asking about his stuff, specifically his old silver pocket watch. Daniel isn't a sentimental guy, so it was weird. He also asked about Grandpa's quirks, his eccentric habits. I just thought it was a random curiosity. Now I don't know, it feels important. That phrase keeps echoing in my head. A once-in-a-lifetime chance. A chance for what? What does it have to do with a dead man's watch? The comments section on my post became my lifeline. Strangers were brainstorming, offering theories, and for the first time I felt like I wasn't just a victim but an investigator in my own life. The pocket watch. It was the one thread I had, the one thing that didn't fit into Daniel's neat little story. My family wanted me to move on, to let it go, but I couldn't. Letting it go felt like letting him win, like agreeing that I was crazy. So I did something I should have done from the start. I stopped trying to convince them and started looking for proof. 2 days later, I drove back to the old house. My hands were sweating on the wheel, and I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see Daniel's car behind me. The police had already been there. My uncle had called them to file a report about the trespasser Daniel had fought off. They'd done a cursory sweep, found nothing, and left. The splintered back door was now covered with a clumsy piece of plywood. I pried it open and slipped inside. The air was still and smelled of decay and my own fear. I didn't care about the main rooms. I went straight to the one place I knew held all the family secrets, Grandpa Robert's study. It was a small, wood-paneled room at the back of the house, filled with dusty books on engineering and local history. Daniel and I were never allowed in here as kids. For hours, I did nothing but search. I pulled books off shelves, shaking them for loose papers. I went through the drawers of his huge oak desk, finding old tax documents, dried-up pens, and paper clips rusted into a single lump. It felt hopeless. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the watch was just a random thought. Then my fingers brushed against a loose floorboard underneath the desk. My heart started hammering. I worked my fingernails into the crack and lifted. Underneath was a small, hollow space, and inside that space was a stack of leather-bound journals, Grandpa Robert's diaries. I sat there on the dusty floor, my flashlight beam dancing across the pages, and I started to read. Most of it was mundane stuff, notes on weather patterns, complaints about his neighbors, details of his work as a municipal surveyor. But then, in a volume dated about a year before he died, the entries started to change. He began writing in a strange, coded language. It wasn't complex, more like a series of personal symbols and abbreviations. But one phrase appeared over and over again: the Centennial Trust. I spent the next hour cross-referencing entries, my mind racing. Slowly, a picture began to form. My grandfather, a man who always distrusted banks and institutions, had set up some kind of private family trust. It wasn't in any official will. It was a secret, a kind of challenge for his descendants, but the conditions for activating it were bizarrely specific. The diary mentioned a key, a vessel, and a moment. I found an entry from his last birthday. The key is silver and tells the time, but its true purpose is to unlock the vessel. The vessel stands guard in my study, its voice silent until the moment is right. The key was the pocket watch. It had to be, but what was the vessel? I looked around the room at the bookshelves, the desk, the mounted map on the wall. Nothing seemed right. Then my light fell upon it. Standing in the corner, covered in a dusty sheet, was a grandfather clock, tall, imposing, and silent. The vessel. A cold dread washed over me. Daniel wasn't asking about the watch out of sentimentality. He knew he had somehow found out about the trust. The once-in-a-lifetime chance wasn't a random phrase uttered in a panic. It was a motive. A multi-million-dollar motive, judging by the figures I saw hinted at in the diary. And I was the only thing standing in his way. My blood ran cold. The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with an audible, horrifying snap. I frantically flipped through the last few pages of the journal, my fingers smudged with dust and ink. I was looking for the moment, the final condition. And then I found it, circled in red ink on a page filled with frantic, spidery handwriting. The trust can only be activated on the centenary of my birth. Not a day before, not a day after. The key must be placed within the vessel's heart as the day ends. I pulled out my phone, my thumb fumbling with the screen. I looked up my grandfather's date of birth, and then I looked at the current date. It was the same day, the day of the attack, his 100th birthday. That was the chance. The one-day window to claim a fortune. Daniel must have found another one of Grandpa's journals, or maybe he'd overheard something years ago. He needed me to help him get into the old house under the plausible excuse of clearing out junk, because he didn't have a key. But once we were inside, I became a liability. The trust documents, as I deciphered from the journal, stated the money went to the descendant who performed the activation. There could only be one. I didn't even think. I just grabbed the journals and ran. I had to get back there, the pocket watch. It was still in a box of my grandfather's effects at my parents' house, a box we were supposed to sort through that day. Daniel must have realized he couldn't find it on my body after I escaped. He'd be going for it. I broke every speed limit getting back into town. I called my parents, but my frantic warnings about a secret trust and a grandfather clock probably just sounded like more evidence of my breakdown. They didn't pick up. When I screeched to a halt in front of the old house, his car was already there, parked hastily by the curb. The plywood over the back door was torn away. I grabbed the heaviest tire iron I had from my trunk and went in, my heart pounding a sick rhythm against my ribs. I found him in the study. He had the silver pocket watch in his hand. It was gleaming in the beam of his flashlight. He had the front panel of the grandfather clock open, revealing a complex set of gears and weights. He hadn't found the secret compartment yet, but he was close, his fingers probing the inside of the wooden case. He heard me come in and spun around. This time there was no mask, no pretense, just pure venomous rage in his eyes. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" he hissed, the watch clutched tight in his fist. "It was never about a burglar, was it, Danny?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I held up the tire iron. "It was about this, all of this." "He was a crazy old man," Daniel spat, his eyes darting between me and the clock. "Hiding a fortune away in some stupid scavenger hunt. It belongs to me. I'm the one who figured it out. I'm the one who deserves it. And I deserved a crowbar to the head." "You were in the way," he screamed, his voice cracking. "It was supposed to be easy, in and out, but you had to fight back, you had to survive, you ruined everything." He lunged not at me but at the clock. He'd found the hidden catch. A small wooden panel popped open inside, revealing a felt-lined recess. That was it, that was the spot. He raised the watch, ready to place it inside and claim everything. It was now or never. I didn't try to fight him, I didn't swing the tire iron. In that split second, as he was about to place the watch in the clock, I did the one thing he wouldn't expect. I pulled out my phone, my thumb already on the record button before it was even fully out of my pocket. "Tell me again," I said, my voice loud and clear in the dead quiet of the room. "Tell me why you did it, why you tried to kill me." He froze, his hand hovering over the recess in the clock. He stared at the phone, and for a moment I saw the calculating mind behind the rage. He was weighing his options, but the greed was too strong. The fortune was inches away. "Because you don't deserve it," he finally roared, the confession tumbling out in a torrent of long-suppressed jealousy and resentment. "Everything was always so easy for you. You were always the sensitive one, the creative one. I had to work my ass off for every scrap of approval from this family, and you just coasted. This is mine, my discovery, my reward." He slammed the watch into the recess. There was a soft click, and deep within the clock's guts, a series of gears began to whir and turn with a sound that hadn't been heard in decades. He'd done it. He turned to me, a triumphant, ugly sneer on his face. "Now what? You have a recording. Who's going to believe you? The crazy cousin who's been having delusions." "Maybe," I said, slowly lowering my phone. "But they won't have to." I didn't go to the police. I didn't even go to my parents. I waited. I waited for the one time a year our entire extended family gets together. My grandmother's birthday dinner a week later. We were all there, gathered in a stuffy, over-decorated restaurant. The air was thick with forced smiles and the polite clinking of silverware. I was the pariah, the awkward problem everyone was trying to ignore. Daniel was the center of attention, laughing and telling a story about a big case he'd won at work. In a lull in the conversation, I stood up, I cleared my throat. "I have something I think you all should hear," I said. Before anyone could stop me, I pressed play. Daniel's voice, raw and full of hate, filled the silent restaurant. "Because you were in the way, this is mine, my discovery, my reward." The silence that followed was more violent than any scream. Aunt Carol's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. My mother covered her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was finally real. Daniel's face went a shade of gray I'd never seen before. The family didn't just break, it detonated. Final update, so that's the end of the story. I'm writing this from a hotel room overlooking a city I've never been to before. The trust was real. The lawyers contacted me a few days after that dinner. Apparently, my grandfather's setup included notifying them the moment the mechanism in the clock was activated. And since Daniel confessed on tape that I was the rightful co-discoverer whom he tried to remove, the entire trust defaulted to me. I'm rich, I guess, but I don't have a family anymore. I'm not a son or a nephew or a cousin. I'm the one who blew everything up. The one who couldn't just let things be. Daniel is in legal trouble, but my aunt and uncle have disowned me for ruining his life. My own parents call, but their voices are strained. They can't look at me without seeing the wreckage I caused. I won, I proved I was right. I have the truth and I have the money. But God, it's the loneliest victory I could have ever imagined. Be careful what you wish for, especially when it's justice. Sometimes the cost is everything you have left.